Welcome to the virtual 2020 meeting of members of the League of Women Voters of the City of New York. I'm Mei Takahashi, the Operations Manager. Before we begin with the contents of the meeting, I'd like to review how we're going to be using our software Zoom. If you have any technical difficulties, please call the office at 212-725-3541 or email admin, ADMIN, at LWVNYC.org. All participants, except presenters, will be muted. We are using the webinar version of the software, so you'll only see video of the presenters, not other participants. If you wish to ask a question, make a comment, make a motion, or second a motion, click on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen and enter them in the box that opens. Please preface your entry with its category: question, comment, motion, or second. All votes will be taken using the polling function. When we get to the business section of our meeting, we will give you instructions on how to vote. You can raise your hand. You can use the raise hand icon to indicate if you would like to be recognized during verbal discussions. And you can find the Q&A icon there where it's pointed with the arrows. And remember, you do need to press enter after you type something for it to be sent. Use this function to make comments, motions, or ask questions when a verbal discussion is not taking place. I'm now turning the meeting over to Ruth Altman, one of our current co-presidents. Ruth Altman.
And to help us keep the league moving forward. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 annual meeting of the League of Women Voters of the City of New York. I am Ruth Altman, your present co-president, and I officially open this meeting. I'd like you to think back to when you first started with the League. For every one of us, no matter when we joined, then certainly looks different than today. For me, it was over 15 years ago, and I was volunteering in the office once a week for 3 hours to answer phones. I never would have imagined video phones, let alone video meetings. At that time, we were dealing with the challenges of new voting machines that scanned. Today, our challenges are quite different. Today, we come together and amid a pandemic, an economy that has been shut down, and during major protests in support of Black Lives Matter. We stand in solidarity with today's movement. As you know, the League was formed on protests, and we believe in the right to be heard. Our meeting today is virtual, but our work continues to be real. And now I hand the meeting over to Crystal Joseph, Vice President of the League. She will begin the business portion of the meeting, after which we will welcome our guest speakers, who include Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hokel, followed by Doug Kellner, co-chair of the New York State Board of Elections, and Jarrett Berg, co-founder of Vote Early New York. And they will talk with us about the effect that the pandemic has had on voting. Thank you. Crystal?
Thank you, Ruth. It's a pleasure to be here this evening and working with you and Kathy over the last few years. Today, we'll be voting on changes to our bylaws, nominations for officers and board directors, the budget, and our local program. We need 27 members for a quorum, and we have 56 members voting. All the votes will be taken using the polling function on Zoom. Let's practice using the polling function. You will see a display test poll appear on your screen. Please click your answer and press submit. Thank you. Let's get to business.
Okay, as you can see, the results of the poll, that we have 33 people voted for 90% think voting is important. Only one person abstained and no one said no.
Thank you, Shelley. If you have any technical issues, please call the office at 212-725-3541 or email at admin@lwvnyc.org. To present the proposed changes to the bylaws, I will now turn the meeting over to Amy Matthews, Secretary of the League, and Diane Burrows, Vice President.
Thank you, Crystal. When the New York State Attorney General approved the merger of the League of Women Voters of the City of New York and the Ed Fund, they approved a set of bylaws for the new successor organization, LWVNYC, Inc. The changes up for a vote today are on these sets of bylaws. The Bylaws Committee and the Board of Directors are recommending a number of housekeeping changes. Details on the proposed changes to the bylaws are referenced on pages 9 and 10 in the package of information sent out initially on May 18th. Proposed changes of the bylaws include the following. The first one, the board chair shall be a member ex officio of all board committees except the nominating committee. Before the merger, the board meetings were run by the co-presidents. Since the board chair is a newly established in the merger bylaws, this change simply provides the board chair with the same information for running the meetings that were held by the co-presidents. And so they're taking this, the board chair will be taking the same responsibility that the co-presidents had in the past. The second change is to add a fourth vice president and remove the vice president numbers. Over the past year, the board and the officers have worked to create a more functional and responsive organization. We believe that there are some specific functions that support the work of the entire organization and in all that we do. In order to create responsibility and accountability for getting that work done, we have redefined the roles of the vice presidents. Going forward, our VPs will be responsible for communications, membership, technology, and development. Our current bylaws include 3 vice presidents. We are asking for a fourth to make sure these 4 functions all have leadership. You might have a question about the succession planning. In the past, the VPs were numbered and would theoretically be in line to assume the co-president roles. 2 points. In practice, we've not always selected our next presidents using this process. Second, and most importantly, the nominations committee is tasked with identifying candidates to fill vacant positions, including the co-presidents, and this will continue. Third, the co-presidents shall be ex officio members of all the programmatic committees. We want to make sure that the co-presidents stay involved with the league's work and mission. Fourth, the board's budget committee role has been expanded to include finance and budget. The board believes that our finances need more scrutiny and direction than simply preparing a budget each year. The Finance and Budget Committee will select and monitor investment firms and report back to the board on budget versus actual progress throughout the year. And lastly, member meeting notices can be sent electronically as well as by mail. We need to be able to reach all members in the many ways that people communicate today. Please note that changes to the bylaws will require a 2/3 majority to pass. Now I'm going to turn it over to Diane Burrows.
Thank you, Amy. Do I have a motion to adopt the bylaws changes as recommended by the board and described in the package of information provided to members on May 18th? To make this motion, please type "so moved bylaws" in the Q&A function and enter. Thank you, Susie Gomes, who has moved, so moved. And now I need a second. Please type in to the Q&A function, second bylaws, and hit enter. Thank you, Laura Quigg, for your second. Is there any discussion? To submit a question, please type the question into the Q&A and press enter. I do not see any questions or any discussion, so we are ready to take our vote. Oh, wait, I think we have one question. Okay, I'm not sure the first word. Something, Gladys is asking, has responsibility been taken away from presidents for running the board meetings? Amy, would you like to answer?
Sure. Hi, Gladys. I think that many nonprofits like to separate the duties of a board chair and co-presidents because it creates a little more accountability. The presidents are accountable to the board chair, and it creates a little bit of a separation of duties. And so when we sent the bylaws to the state of New York for approval, this was included there by our lawyers. So we think that it's a better way to, well, not a better way, but it's the way we will be conducting our business, because we will have this separation of duties. But the agenda for the board meeting will definitely be based on what the co-presidents need to raise, during the meetings. And there will be lots of lively discussion, as there always has been.
Thank you very much, Amy and Gladys. I see no further discussion, so we are ready to take our vote. Please use the polling function to cast your vote and remember to hit submit. As we vote, our parliamentarian, Shelley Warwick, will report the vote as it's completed.
Waiting, there's a few people who haven't voted yet, so I'm giving it a few more times. There's 2 people with a raised hand. Do you want to just address that?
Hi, Edna. Edna Rosen? Are you having an issue with the poll? Also, Marianne Novak. You can talk if you are for the moment. We'll mute you again.
I'm not having any problems. This is Marion. I'm not having any problems with it. I did answer.
Okay.
Did you not get my poll answer?
We did. Thank you so much.
Just raise
You
your
just had your hand raised. That's all.
Okay.
Edna, you also had your hand raised. Did you have
Yeah.
an issue?
I have no issues.
Okay, great. Thank you both.
Right, I'm still, people haven't voted yet. Okay, Redna keeps hitting the raised hand. All right, I'm going to end the polling because I assume it is. We have a 98% of those voting. Candidate was 48 people, which is more than what we need for a quorum. 1 person voted against, and there was no abstentions.
Very good.
As you can see the results. And
thank you, Shelley. The motion has passed. The changes to the bylaws have been adopted. And now we turn the meeting over to Mary Jenkins, past president, board director, and chair of the nominations committee. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Diane and Amy. The Nominations Committee has proposed and the Board of Directors has approved the slate of officers and directors. Do we have that slide to show right now?
Sorry.
I don't see it.
Here it is. I'm sorry. Here we are. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. There we are. Okay. Complete bios can be found on pages 4 to 7 in your annual meeting packet. We just need a simple majority for this to pass. With our new bylaws, in order to ensure better continuity, officers and board members are now elected in alternate years, and each serve 2 years. This year only, the new officers will serve 2 years, and the board of directors will serve 1 year, but could be reelected. Are there any nominations from the floor? If you choose to nominate someone from the floor, that person must be a member in good standing and has given consent to be nominated. Please type the person's name into the Q&A and the position you are nominating for. We'll give you a couple of seconds to do that, if you so desire.
Mary, we do have one question in the Q&A, which is, are there members
I see
of the board that are,
the question is, are there members of the board that are continuing? And if so, who are they? Okay, so let me just have a look here. Patricia Manning and Bella Wang are continuing on the board. And you perhaps would like to know that once the current officers and board are approved and installed, at the first meeting, they may appoint up to, I believe it's 3 more board members. So it's possible for board members to also be appointed. Okay, let's see. Do we have another question down here? Or is this the same one? Don't see any name associated with board chair. Well, Amy would like to answer that question.
Hi. The reason why there's no name associated with board chair is because that position will be elected by the board at the first board meeting after this annual meeting.
Okay, well, if there are no nominations from the floor, do I have a motion to accept the slate of officers and board directors as recommended? Please type "so moved" -nominations into the Q&A and press enter. Marian Novick has so moved. Do we have a second? Pam Roderick has seconded, and so has Jane Hatterer. So please use the polling function to vote yes or no on the slate as recommended. So we'll give you a couple of more seconds to complete your voting.
Does everybody vote?
Any more voting?
All right, we don't seem to be getting any more. All right. And I'm going to share the results. 48 people were in favor. One person was no, and 0 abstentions, so the motion carries.
Yes, we just need a simple majority for that. So very good. Well, thank you so much, and welcome to our new board and officers, and special thanks to our retiring board and officers for all you've done. Ruth Altman and Kathy Gray, co-presidents, Beth Kelly, vice president, Jill Byatt, board member, and to myself, Mary Jenkins, board member and education committee chair. Jane Hatterer will become our new chair of the education committee. To discuss the budget, I will turn the meeting over to Leslie Siegel, our new co-president and chair of the Finance and Budget Committee.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the vote of confidence. Before we start, though, I see that we have one hand raised, and there's a woman, Jane, who would like to ask a question. So, Jane, I'm going to allow you to speak for a moment. Jane? Okay, so I'm going to lower your hand, Jane, instead. Thank you very much. Okay, so now everybody, please let me run you through the proposed budget, which you can find on page 8 of the annual meeting packet. If we could just move to the next slide, that would be great. So the financials are presented as a merged entity. For information, our fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So let me first walk you through the fiscal 2020 forecast. So if you're looking at this slide on the screen, you'll see from left to right, the 2020 forecast, the budget, the variance to budget, the increase or decrease to the budget, and in the very right-hand column will be the fiscal 21 budget, which I will address in a moment. But as I said, let me start with the forecast. So we're going to be unfavorable to our fiscal 20 budget by about $75,000. This is primarily as a result of not holding a special event in this fiscal year. In part, also our fundraising has been impacted by the pandemic, a theme you will see reappear in the 21 budget. We were 80,000 unfavorable on income and 5,000 favorable on expenses. The good news is this does include a $14.9 thousand fund from the Paycheck Protection Program, which we received in April, and that was post this forecast, which will not, sorry, it wasn't this forecast. It will not recur in fiscal 21. However, since the forecast was prepared, we have received an additional $9,500 in donations from our Giving Tuesday Now campaign, although this was offset by a $15.6 thousand decline in the value of our investments due to the impact of COVID-19 on the markets. I'm now going to move on and talk about the fiscal 21 budget. For this portion, please look at that right column, the column all the way to the right. So we are budgeting a $64,000 deficit in fiscal 21. This is for a couple of reasons. One, as I mentioned earlier, the COVID pandemic is having a significant significant impact on our ability to fundraise. We're not going to be able to hold a lot of in-person meetings, and we're not charging for our Zoom meetings. In addition, going from a $75,000 deficit to zero is unlikely in 1 year. However, the introduction of our new Vice President of Development, Susie Gomes, we will be focusing on improving our financial stability, and we will have that plan. The good news is that we do have sufficient reserves to carry us through the next several years, so we're not in danger of going under. As a result of having Susie in place, we are going to actually budget a $40,000 increase in our direct contributions, although this will be partially offset by a slight increase in costs for investments in technology that will help enable our development efforts. So now in the case of the budget, I would like to open up for questions before we take for the motion. We ask for the motion. I'll give you 5 minutes for questions since we are running on a schedule. Please raise your hand if you have a question. I see a couple raised, just give me a moment. You can raise your hand by using the raise hand function that you'll see in the webinar controls. So with that, I'm going to recognize Kai Rosenthal. Just give me a second, Kai. I'm trying to allow you to talk. Okay, I'm unmuting you. Kai, did you have a question? Kai, can you please unmute yourself?
Thank you.
Hey,
fine.
there you go. Oh, you're fine. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I see that we have Jane raising her hand again. Jane, I have allowed you to speak. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Are there any questions from you, Jane? Jane, can you hear me? Okay, then I will mute you again and lower your hand. Okay, I think we now have a question from Carol Melman. Carol, I'm allowing you to talk. And please unmute yourself.
Yes, I wanted to know what amount, how much money do we have in reserves?
We have over $230,000.
Okay, but we'll be going through it very fast, almost half of it in these next 2 years. And is there a way to lower expenses so that we don't use up our reserves that quickly?
We can certainly take a look at that. But where we are, most of our expenses are what I would call, I mean, not really fixed costs per se, but costs that are variable over the long term. So the bulk of our expenses are in salaries, and we already have a very, very small staff. We basically have 1.5 people. Yeah, and then the rest is primarily within our office space. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, you definitely have to raise more money because that could not continue. I mean, it's sufficient reserves now, but continue to use it at that rate would end up in 4 years or something like that, you know.
Exactly. No, fully agree. Thank you. Okay, I see Joanna Pewitt. I'll take one more question.
And there's a couple of questions in the Q&A too, as well as people raising their hand.
My question.
Okay.
My question, Shelley, is what was our shortfall last year?
We actually had a surplus last year.
Really?
A surplus of yes, because of our special event. Our gala was remarkably successful.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay.
Yes, and that's what a lot of what's helping us get through this hard time. Okay. And then Jane's asking, first of all, what technology investments will be made? Could we see a balance sheet? And why do we expect a 40,000 increase in donations? So let me take those in order. And then given the time, I'm going to actually cut off questions. Yes, we can send the balance sheet out to the membership. So we will do that. I do not have it ready, but we can absolutely send that out after the meeting. The technology investments that will be primarily within Salesforce so that we can do a much better job of tracking our campaigns and donations so we know who to hit up for direct contributions. We're expecting a 40,000 increase in donations because we actually have somebody very dedicated to this now, which we haven't in the past, had a specific vice president in charge of development. And Susie's already, hitting the ground running in terms of raising funds. And the reason salaries are increasing 23% is because we did not have everybody on board for a full year. And that is really just the annualization impact. So with that, I'm going to end the question and answer period, and I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the budget. Do I have a motion? If so, please type "so moved" budget into the Q&A. If you have other questions, feel free to just write me afterwards and I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, I've got Dorothy. Thank you so much for motioning for the budget. Do I have a second? Please type "second" budget into the Q&A. Okay, Pamela Roderick has seconded. Thank you very much, Pamela. And with that, we'll bring the poll up. And please vote yes, no, or abstain on the poll and hit submit. Okay. And when we're ready, our parliamentarian Shelley Warwick will announce the results of the poll.
We get another minute or so.
Absolutely.
Okay. We have 94%, which was 47 people voting for it, 1 person voting no, and 2 abstentions. So it passes.
Thank you very much, Shelley. Our special guest has arrived, so I'm actually going to take a pause in the business portion of the meeting. We'll recommence after her speech, and I'm going to turn it over to Ruth Altman for an introduction.
Ruth?
Ruth?
Kathy, maybe, I don't see Ruth, so maybe.
There she is. Asked to unmute.
Yeah, I did.
Hello?
Yeah.
Am I okay?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Oh,
Ruth, go ahead.
Sorry. I approached her after her speech and she warmly greeted me. She was immediately enthusiastic about accepting an invitation to speak at a league event. And a few months later, there she was, our featured speaker at a league program. Since then, she has been a friend of the League of Women Voters. She even paid a special visit this year to our voting reform committee. We are delighted that the Lieutenant Governor of the state of New York could join us tonight. Kathy Hokel has been the New York State Lieutenant Governor since 2015 and always a champion for women. She is no doubt extremely busy right now with her new role helping to open New York State from our pandemic pause. So we are truly honored that she would take time from her busy schedule to be a part of our annual meeting. Please welcome Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hokel.
Well, thank you, Ruth. It's so nice to see everybody, even in this kind of strange virtual way, but I was so delighted to get your invitation. And to you, Ruth, and Kathy Gray, who are our outgoing co-presidents, you've done an incredible job really keeping the torch lit so high that has been passed on to us over the last 100 years. And I was involved in a number of celebrations in New York State last fall, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the League in our own state, and I think as recently as February, celebrating it for the rest of the nation. So it's a big year for the League of Women Voters, but as you know, I'm also a little partial to this organization, considering I was one of the presidents. I was president of my local League of Women Voters when I was a much younger woman and wanting to get involved in issues that were important, and those issues are still with us today, and the fight continues. But I had to give it up in order to run for local office. So that's the only reason I put down my legal voter president hat and stepped into the public arena. But I've always valued the relationships I nurtured during that time and have such respect for people like yourselves and our incoming presidents who are going to continue fighting the good fight. And that's exactly what we've done for over 100 years here in New York. And we can talk a little bit about what's happening with COVID, but you think about many of these celebrations and events that have been sidelined because of this inability for people to gather. And one of them that is disappointing to me very much is the fact that we are also celebrating the 100th anniversary of women winning the right to vote. And it's something we celebrated with great fanfare in 2017 here in New York because we're so proud of that. But the rest of the nation caught up 3 years later, and we had so many events planned. I'm the chair of the statewide centennial celebration organization, and we had a lot of things and trying to drive people to the significant homes and places and centers for celebrating these brave women who many generations ago just stood against the tides of their time, and they took to the streets and they marched and they went to Washington and they protested. And so you hearken their voices here today in a different era, but people are still taking to the streets and making sure that we continue moving our society forward in a more just way. And so it's amazing to live through what we're going through right now. And I appreciate the League for always being that sort of a port in the storm where people know that you are a very well-respected organization. And trust is something that's often the collateral damage when there's conflicts in society. And this is one organization that I know people will always trust to do the right thing by the society and its members. So happy to be back with the League. And I'm very excited also because I just took the opportunity to mail my absentee ballot in. I hope everybody's done this. And again, this is progress in one sense. It's something that we hadn't expected to do, but when you're living in the middle of a global pandemic, you have to find safe ways for people to be able to exercise their right to vote. And that was one of the reasons we were able to allow for absentee voting in the primary that's literally just a week away and onward into November. And I think that's really significant that we're even seeing in school board votes and other elections, the number of people participating is phenomenal. It's what we've been talking about all our lives, wanting to see more people exercise that fundamental basic right. And they hadn't for many reasons. And last year, we also started early voting, and I was an early voting person on the very first day. I love the fact that you don't have to be confined to just one day. So that was a significant reform. But to couple the early voting now with the ability to vote by absentee ballot, and I hope this continues beyond this pandemic, because there's no reason why people should have any barriers to exercising their rights. And I know the League has been a strong proponent of this from the very beginning. Just to give you some insight as to where we are today, New York City should be able to head into the next phase of the reopening after this unprecedented, very dramatic actions we had to take in March to protect the health and well-being of our residents, literally shutting down the economy, shutting down society. And it's been an amazing process to see and work with Governor Cuomo on how we've defined the problem, how we've gotten the support of our constituents to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and actually have them adhere to what we've asked them to do. And we've asked them to make tremendous sacrifices. Many people lost their jobs and people were having to go into the line of fire every day, putting on a uniform to either work in the healthcare situation or put on a uniform to work in a grocery store. A lot of people endangered their own lives to help keep society functioning during these last 100 days. And that's something that I'll never lose I'll always be in awe of to think that how many ordinary Americans and ordinary New Yorkers stood up and fought for all of us to be safe and continue to have food on our tables and our prescriptions filled when we go to the pharmacy. So this is kind of a fascinating study in what people can do when they're really under stress and how they're so resilient. And now we're at this point where we're able to say, because you did what we asked you to do, you stayed away from loved ones, you missed Passover, you missed Easter, you missed Mother's Day, you missed seeing everybody you want to gather with over Memorial Day. Because people sacrificed, we are in a place that I could not have predicted just 6 weeks ago that we'd ever achieve this quickly. And that is to be able to say, hopefully on Monday, and the governor will announce this tomorrow, I believe, that we are going to enter a phase where, yes, you can get out to the hair salon and get your hair done again. Retail shops will be open. And then shortly thereafter that, there'll be indoor dining, but you can have outdoor dining starting as soon as Monday. So I've been able to sort of give you an early snapshot of what that looks like living in upstate and helping manage the reopening. And there's been some bumps in the road, and there are people, not all of them adhering to what they're supposed to, but by and large, the businesses are excited to be reopened. You'll see that very shortly. You'll see more people dining in restaurants, on sidewalks and in makeshift areas, sometimes in alleys, and then maybe closed down streets. And I'm just encouraging people to continue to support them. They've really been through a tough time, and they define much of the character of our communities. So I just want to remind everyone to get out there and support their local businesses. Just a couple more topics I want to touch on before you get back to your annual meeting. One is the census. If you could just continue partnering with us to make sure that people will participate in the census. This is our every decade opportunity to make sure that we get our fair share, not just when it comes to federal funding for critically important programs to help women and people, healthcare programs, and help our veterans. And so many different programs are based on our population, which is derived by the census, but also our representation in Washington. And I know a little bit about this because 10 years ago, I was sort of a victim of redistricting and lost my seat in Congress after they redrew the lines a little bit. But we also don't want to lose any more members of Congress. I mean, we lost 2 last time, we lost 2 the time before that. And that really dilutes our influence in Washington. And I remember growing up, we used to have 43 members of Congress representing the state of New York. Today we have 27. So we need to make sure that we continue to make sure every person's counted. And I appreciate everything you can do to help us accomplish that. And I will just close by saying this League of Voters was built as part of a movement. It was a movement that was started in our state back in 1848 when women and some enlightened men gathered at Seneca Falls, and they began this long march, a long march that eventually resulted in the right to vote for some, and for others, African Americans had to wait till 1964 to have that guarantee with the Civil Rights Act. But it was accomplished because people never gave up the fight. Today, I am really heartened to see the young people and people of all ages stepping up, and whether they're in the streets or just through social media using their platforms to elevate voices that have been suppressed for far too long, and that we start to get to a place where there's no longer a white America and a Black America. And this really makes me feel optimistic that we're living through a time that's going to be looked back upon as a time when everything changed, and it will have changed for the better. That is in my heart, that I believe that's what's going to happen. So to my friends at the League, thank you for always being there at the forefront of major movements like we're experiencing right now, but preserving the integrity of our democracy by ensuring access to vote and making sure people know how important it is. And I participated in many League of Voter debates. I'm kind of steeled because of that. I always used to get so anxious and nervous whenever I had to get ready for my League debates, and always so relieved when it was over. But I've been through a lot, and I was on the other side. I used to be one of the questioners in my earlier career. And again, that is such a valuable service to the public, to allow the public to, through your platform and what you create, an opportunity to see leaders. And one thing this pandemic has shown us, that there is such a stark difference in how people will choose to lead during a public health crisis like this. The contrast between what we saw in Washington and in the state of Capitol and Albany could not be greater than night and day. It is extraordinary. And I hope that reminds people how important it is to get out, make sure their voices are heard, show up on election day. And I do believe that this is going to be a year we break the records. The participation we're going to see in the primaries and in the general election are going to be for the record books, and the League will be there leading the way. So thank you very much, and wish you well. And I look forward to seeing all of you in person. Again, I miss the human contact, and I'll be out there as soon as it's safe to do so.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor Hokel. That was an inspiring and informative speech, and we absolutely will continue to work with you to support the census and all the other very important things around voting rights. In fact, we're hopeful that Governor Cuomo will extend the absentee ballot, temporary illness exception for November as well. We're very glad.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a excellent point. And I think that also ties into our concern that this pandemic can rear its ugly head once again, just because we have it under control and that our infection rate is down to 1% of those testing positive, is down 1% compared to other states where it's going up much higher. That I don't think we'll be out of the woods in terms of feeling secure about people going to vote even in November. So I'm really hopeful that that'll occur, and that the boards of elections will be able to start preparing for November. Again, what we're hearing out of Washington, there'll be people perhaps in the White House that are going to question the integrity of this process, but it's worked in other states. And you look at a place like Oregon that has about a 98% participation rate in elections, far better than what we have here in New York State. Again, the birthplace of so many major movements, and we still haven't found a way to inspire people to get out to vote more often. So I think the absentee ballot, when it shows up in your house and all you got to do is drop it in the mailbox, it cannot get any easier than that. So we'll fight together toward that.
Excellent. We fully agree. Well, we're really glad you were able to join us tonight, and we're thrilled by your clear passion for the League and the work we do.
All right.
If your schedule permits it, please feel free to stay on for the remainder of the meeting, but we absolutely know how busy you are.
I'm speaking to a large group of young people about how we're surviving the pandemic in a matter of minutes. But this was an honor to be able to just have a couple minutes with all of you. And thank you for all you do for our city and our state.
Thank you. Okay. So with that, we are going to resume the business portion of the meeting. I'm going to turn it over now to Bella Wang to discuss the local program. And Bella is a board director and a chair of the Voting Reform Initiative. So Bella, over to you.
Hello. The League of Women Voters New York City Board of Directors recommends that our local program focus on disaster preparedness and resilience for our election procedures here in New York City. This year, COVID-19 disrupted our primary elections, which exposed a variety of weaknesses in our current system. We'll also work with the State League to advocate for election reforms, especially for vote by mail and for expanded absentee ballot access. You can find our recommendations on page 20 of the annual meeting packet. This proposed local program will include procedures that protect the health of both poll workers and voters while ensuring ballot access for all voters. Our local program will require both research and action. Responses from our members show agreement and support for this urgent need. The membership would like to see the League take action to protect our city's election system, making this a priority for the upcoming year. Now, according to our bylaws, any program suggestions need to be submitted 60 days prior to the annual meeting. So we cannot accept new program ideas from the floor today. However, if you have any ideas that you would like to have addressed, please enter them in the Q&A in a few minutes during the time when we ask for directions to the board. If you would like to comment on this program, you can enter those after we have a motion on the floor to accept first this local program. Do I have a motion to accept the local program as proposed following the previous directions? Thank you. Dorothy Uzadan, sorry if I butchered your last name, has so moved. Do I have a second? Susie Gomes has, and Sandra Brand have second. Thank you both. Do I have any discussion of the local program? If so, please use the raise hand function that we used earlier.
So Bella, we have a question from Sally Robinson. I'm going to allow Sally to talk.
Sure.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. Actually, Bella, the State League and the National League do not support vote by mail. So I think
yes, apologies. I noticed that
clarity,
yes, that's a good point.
That. It's commonly understood to mean everyone getting a ballot in the mail and everyone voting by mail as opposed to no excuse absentee. And both
yes,
the
to be
state
clear, no excuse absentee.
do not support all vote by mail. So I think in the interest of clarity, it would be better if you drop that out of what we're voting on.
Can we see what's actually in the, Leslie, could you see what's in the packet on page 20? I don't think I said vote by mail in that phrasing.
I think it wasn't what I got as a clarification.
The as phrased in the, on page 20, which is the actual packet, it does not say vote by mail. So maybe if, Leslie, if you have the exact phrasing.
Hang tight. I will need to get to that. Give me a moment, please. Everyone
Sorry.
bear with. That's okay. I'm almost there. So the clarification, unfortunately, does say that. Let me look at what was the original wording. Sorry, just scrolling there. Okay, in the original wording, it actually does say the need for vote by mail.
Oh, apologies.
So
well, I will, are we able to amend that to say no excuse absentee voting? To be more precise.
I think you can have a friendly amendment or amendment by the mover.
Yeah. Yes. Shelley, can you just weigh in on that? Shelley, as our parliamentarian?
sorry, I'm unmuting myself. I'm sorry. Yes, on this, our bylaws require that all suggestions and forms be done 60 days before. We will clarify this in our actions rather than in the program. You know, rather, we cannot change the voting at this point, but we should know that we will be working on in concert with the state and National League.
No, I don't think you can have a local program that contradicts state and national positions.
Actually, as it happens, I believe in the Q&A, it looks like Kay Dorn says that the update from June 3rd says vote by mail. So Kate, perhaps you could clarify a little bit more.
Hold on, let me give Kate the right to speak. Kate, I have given you the ability to speak and I've asked you to unmute.
Thank you very much. Yes, I thank Sally Robinson for bringing in the comments about not having any kind of a local issue or action that would be in contravention to the national or state positions. And I understand that there's a great deal of confusion surrounding the difference between vote by mail and no excuse absentee voting. And we do not support vote by mail, and that's not the direction that we would want to even research. We're going full steam ahead toward no excuse absentee voting, and we're halfway there. We just get the next elected legislature to vote for it in January, and then it'll be on the ballot in November 2021, and everyone in the state can vote to change our absentee voting system. So I would encourage you to accept Sally's friendly amendment and eliminate anything that's in contravention to state or national positions.
Yes, let me say that the phrasing vote by mail has had a lot of definitions. So that's honestly been a little bit in flux. I am perfectly fine with making that amendment because the intention was to refer to no excuse absentee if we're allowed to by the parliamentarian.
I believe that you can make a friendly amendment, and as the mover, Bella.
Okay, well, I'm happy to move to make that amendment.
Okay. So we're striking vote by mail totally.
Could we change it to no excuse absentee? That was the original intent. So I would move to strike the phrasing vote by mail and change it to no excuse absentee voting.
Right. Do we have a second for that? Can you please just type second Q&A, second local program in the Q&A? And I think Gladys Krasner has a question. So I have allowed Gladys to talk.
Oh, thank you. If we vote down this program, which for me is amply covered by state and national, what would be the opportunity to introduce a new program that would deal with the future of New York City?
According to the bylaws, there would be no program unless we convened another meeting, a special meeting of the members. We would have to convene another special meeting of the members, have a quorum, and then vote on a program. So otherwise, there would be no program.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we are running out of time, and so I think we're going to shut down questions right now. We do have a second for the amendment to the motion. So Bella, I'll turn it back to you to ask for a motion to accept the local program as amended.
Sure. So to back up, do I have a motion to accept the local program as amended? So moved by Carol Melman. Do I have a second? Second by Marian Novak. Thank you, both of you. Let us vote. Please vote yes or no on the poll that will be appearing on your screen.
Okay, 1 second. I'm far right, okay. Another minute, a few seconds, okay. We have 47% in favor, 85%, 47 people plus the 10 proxies, 5 against, and 3 abstentions. So the motion would carry.
All right, thank you so much. I am now turning the meeting over to Jill Byatt, Board Director.
Unmuting oneself is the hardest part of this whole process. Hello, everybody. I'm Jill Byatt, and I'm moderating directions to the board this evening. This is the time when members have an opportunity to provide guidance to the incoming board. Please be assured that your comments will be recorded in the minutes of the annual meeting and will be discussed at the first board meeting of the new fiscal year. Just to be clear, this is not a question and answer session. This is a pure providing information to the board session. If you have something you'd like the board to know, please type it into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, prefacing it with the word comment, and please remember to press the return key after you finish typing. Comments will be read out in the order they're received. In the meantime, while you all type, we have 3 directions which have already been received, and I'm going to read those. They may take a little while. They're detailed and important. So here we go. The first one is from Gladys Krausner, who, as you all know, is a past president of this chapter. Gladys says, in the midst of a pandemic and a national protest against unjust police violence, you have an obligation to maintain league principles, read the LWVUS impact on issues, and stand up to national if necessary. I am a proud and active past president of the City League. Never have I been as offended as a league member as by the action call with directions to white members. I call on you in this time of national crisis to recognize that unity and not divisiveness will achieve our long-time goal of equality and justice. With appreciation for your service, Gladys Krausner. Thank you very much for that, Gladys. Moving on, we have a direction from Bob Ettington, who is a former chair of voter services and much missed. Bob says, I ask LWVNYC to acknowledge our racist foundations and delve deeper into understanding our white privilege. This can only be achieved by working with our members of color and communities of color to be accountable to the League's commitment to anti-racism. It is not enough in this day and age for the League to not be racist, in quotes. It is a time to act on those principles. Thank you, Bob. And finally, this from Zuha Jamil. While many at the League might consider calls to action recognizing privilege accusatory or alienating, it is high time we collectively acknowledge that adopting this narrative has, in fact, nothing to do with singling out the individual. Rather, it is a factual representation of a larger, interconnected, and state-sanctioned system that has been a breeding ground for decades-long racism and bigotry. It also underscores our need to recognize that being able to live without having to be defined by one's skin color
is actually a distinguishing characteristic of privilege. And it isn't until we look past this privilege and move beyond the syntax that we can come to realize that the policing system that makes a majority of Americans feel safe their entire life is the same system that is over-policing and oppressing Black Americans and other minorities. Acknowledging one's privilege is by no means synonymous with an admission of intentionally contributing to the marginalization of another. Rather, it is recognizing that some aspect of one's identity that is beyond one's control puts them in a better position than others and can accelerate their progress in the race of life. It also means that whatever majority group one belongs to has historically contributed to the oppression of another. However, there is a silver lining. The League, given its powerful history and expansive footprint, is in a unique position to cultivate a shared space for all members where complex narratives and evidence can be drawn together to chart a path forward that is inclusive, yet formidable when it comes to standing up against internal, systemic, and institutionalized racism. I call on the LWVNYC's leadership to integrate these principles organization-wide in all aspects of our present and future programming. Thank you, Zuha, for that extremely strong message. And now we're going to move on to messages received on the Q&A. And we have two, one from Adrienne Kivelson, who says, I suggest that the City League study the city budget process to assure that human services are properly prioritized as the city faces a serious budget crisis resulting from the pandemic. Thank you, Adrienne. Joanne Pugh, the City League should study the voting situation so that it can accept vote by mail as the more modern method, which I think is something that we discussed in the prior section. Do we have any more directions to the board from the membership, please? Okay, thank you all very much. These are absolutely terrific directions to the board. That appears to be the end of the directions and to the business portion of the meeting. I thank you, and we all thank you very much for your input. I now turn you over to our co-president, Kathy Gray.
So if I can interrupt, actually, we have our two guest speakers here, and we're going to get to that portion of the meeting now. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to Pat Manning. Pat, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, and can you please introduce our speakers? Thank you so much, Joe.
Okay, am I on?
Yeah.
Thank you. We are pleased to welcome two distinguished speakers this evening, speaking on voting in the time of crises. And we are grateful for their past presentations at our monthly League program. We will take questions using the Q&A function after both speakers have made their presentations. The League of Women Voters, NYC, welcomes our next speaker, Douglas A. Kellner, co-chair of the New York State Board of Elections, appointed in 2005. Prior to this appointment, he served as the Democratic Commissioner from Manhattan on the New York City Board of Elections. Co-chair Kellner has a long history of working to safeguard the vote. He was one of the first proponents of a voter verifiable paper audit trail for electronic voting machines, and he was the leader of the opposition to New York City's contract to purchase unverifiable direct recording electronic voting machines. Co-chair Kellner's presence here tonight could not have been timelier in the wake of the coronavirus, as we are all anxious to be updated on various voting issues and changes implemented due to the coronavirus and more. Mr. Kellner, please, you have the floor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Pat. and thank you all. I want to start by echoing the remarks of Lieutenant Governor Hokel that the League has demonstrated its tremendous value in participating in monitoring what goes on in election administration and in supporting election reform. And I can't stress how important it is to have that outside oversight of what's going on in election administration. And you deserve a lot of credit. And in particular, there's some members of the City League that have really put in a lot of time. And with fear of overlooking some, Kate Doran, who goes to the weekly meetings of the City Board of Elections and reports to a host of good government groups and others on what's going on there, and Adrian Kivelson, who has also spent a lot of time on this. And Kathy Gray has also contributed, and my apologies to the many others of you who have made contributions that I'm overlooking right now. This pandemic has created tremendous challenges for so many people, and certainly the election area has been turned upside down as a result of this. And candidates also have had great difficulties in getting their message across while keeping social distancing. Governor Cuomo took early steps to address the issue with respect to election administration by postponing the presidential primary until next Tuesday, by providing for the use of COVID as an excuse for absentee ballots for this primary election. And as Governor Hokel indicated, it only applies to the primary, but certainly on the table within the next few weeks following the primary will be decisions to address how to handle the November election. In addition, the governor shortened, well, actually the legislature shortened the period for petitioning and substantially reduced the number of petition signatures. And remarkably, one of the first group of court cases that was addressed by the state courts were dealing with petition challenges. And the courts heard a substantial number of cases, and the Court of Appeals, at least for recent era, took 5 cases when it usually doesn't take any. So, and 2 of the significant decisions that they made were that rules are rules and not to be waived even with coronavirus as an excuse, and removed 1 incumbent assembly member from the ballot. And also saying rules are rules, removed a 2nd incumbent from the ballot for petition fraud. And those were remarkable rulings, but based on the principle that we have to uphold the rule of law in election administrations and treat everyone in a consistent manner. Because of the governor's executive order authorizing the use of absentee ballots by all voters, we have seen a record number of applications for absentee ballots. And indeed, saying it's a record number understates the sea change that has occurred. So in the very hotly contested presidential primary in 2016, there were 115,000 absentee ballots cast. As of Monday, the New York City Board of Elections had already received 700,000 applications for absentee ballots, which is 7 times the number of applications 4 years ago. And in Manhattan, the number is 20 times as many applications for absentee ballots as there were 4 years ago. Now, you can imagine that this has put a tremendous stress on the City Board of Elections to address this complete change in election procedures. As of last week, there were serious doubts whether the city board would actually be able to mail out the ballots in a timely manner, but they moved heaven and earth, and based on what they're telling us, that they will have responses to all of the absentee applications in the mail by Friday. And most of them, all but a couple tens of thousands will be mailed by Thursday. It's an accomplishment on their part. And I hope it's accurate that they will actually get them in the mail this week. But voting by mail is not the solution. I'm going to get into that in a minute. Originally, the governor's office was seriously considering just holding an all-mail election. And we at the State Board of Elections vigorously objected to that. And that's because there are so many problems with the mail that when you hold an election by mail, you make the Postal Service your partner. And those of you who live in New York City know full well what the problems are with getting your mail now in a timely manner. And even though the board may actually get all of these ballots in the mail by Thursday or Friday, that doesn't mean that all of the voters are going to receive them. We argued successfully to the governor that they needed to leave early voting and election day voting in place. And the good news is that the city board has been able to fully staff both early voting and election day voting in matters that are in a manner that is consistent with social distancing. No small accomplishment. I'll say one, I told you so, and thank the League for its support that we were able to get the legislature to implement early voting for November of last year, which meant that in order to do early voting in November, we had to finally consolidate and move the local primary election from September to June last year, which a lot of legislators were not happy about the change in the calendar last year. But the fact that we were able to do a run of early voting last November meant that the city wasn't doing it for the first time this year. And imagine if we were introducing early voting for the first time now, on top of switching to absentees. So I'm so happy that we were able to have a good dry run last November. The one little disappointing statistic is that the rates of utilization of early voting this year are way below the number of early voting in last year's off-year November election. So the message that I would like to get out for people who haven't received their ballots yet is early voting is a good option. And I'm crossing my fingers about what's going to happen on Tuesday. I hope that we're not going to have a huge surge on Tuesday because the need for social distancing will inevitably create lines for people who want to do election day voting. While on the other hand, the early voting sites are underutilized in terms of their capacity. And there have been very, very few lines, and the sites are set up well for social distancing, so that the message is, if you haven't gotten your absentee ballot in the mail yet, then try voting at early voting on tomorrow, Saturday or Sunday. There are a couple of open items in addition to deciding whether COVID will be an excuse for absentee voting in November, that New York's absentee rules, used by just 3% of the voters, really need a big overhaul. And people are going to get a little bit of a shock when they find out on June 23rd that many contests will be undecided by the early voting and election night returns that will still be available on Tuesday night. But if half or more of the votes are by absentee ballots in New York, those absentee ballots aren't counted until a week after the election. That's when they begin the count. And I might say that implementing social distancing, and if there are close contests and the lawyers are getting involved, then it may take several weeks before we have returns from New York City. And I've already raised certain concerns with the city board staff that they may want to reconsider their current plan and beef up the space that is available for doing their absentee ballot canvass. So that's one area where we might consider changing the law. And by the way, because of that New York constitutional requirement, since absentee voting has been in place since 1864, the rule in New York is that if you apply for an absentee ballot because you think you're going to be out of the city on election day, and in fact you are in the city on election day, the law requires you to vote in person. And so even if you've already mailed in your absentee ballot, if you're in the jurisdiction, you're supposed to vote in person. And the way that's handled in New York is they have to check the poll books to determine whether you voted in person before considering whether to count the absentee ballot. Most other states simply say if you've applied for an absentee ballot, then you're not eligible to vote in person. And then they can allow the absentee ballots to be processed and start the counting right away on election day. So that's one change. Another change that's very important is that in New York, we don't have a procedure where if someone challenges an absentee ballot because they left something off the application or the signature doesn't seem to match the voter signature on file, to notify the voter and allow the voter to correct that deficiency. And the most common thing that's happening now, they see, because a lot of people are voting absentee for the first time, is the voter fails to sign the ballot envelope. And if the voter doesn't sign the ballot envelope, it's void. And yet there's no system in place for notifying the voter to say, wait a minute, you forgot to sign this. Here's how you can correct this in time for your vote to count. And many states have procedures that allow that. New York needs those kinds of procedures. And indeed, 3 federal courts in other states have declared laws like New York unconstitutional. So those are things that are on the agenda. If I had more time, I'd give all of my concerns about voting for mail, because I think that a mail voting system has so many opportunities for fraud. And even though I'm a Democrat, and this seems to be the message that the Republicans keep repeating over and over again, I'm in favor of what we have in place as an emergency procedure. But I think in the long run, we're better served by having people vote in person. And if I had more time, I'd go into it. And maybe some future event, you'll invite me to talk in greater depth about that. But again, thank you for all that you do. And let's cross our fingers that things will be manageable on Tuesday.
Thank you, Doug. We thank you very much for being here to address the league at its annual meeting. And if you can just stay with us a little longer until we hear from the second speaker, we will then ask the audience if they have questions, and hopefully you will be able to respond to those. So I hope you can just give us a few more minutes. We will now welcome Jarrett Berg. He's a New York attorney and voting rights advocate with a passion for protecting and advancing civil and political rights. Attorney Berg co-founded Vote Early NY to ensure that the voter access reform policies he helped design and fought to enact would be implemented responsibly across New York State. As the former executive director of the New York Democratic Lawyers Council, Attorney Berg served as statewide voter protection director from 2016 to 2018. He is focused on raising awareness about voting rights, the rule of law, and the need to safeguard human rights norms. He is involved in various efforts to reform American democracy and has worked in politics for several election cycles as a legal consultant, voter protection attorney, and constituency organizer. We thank Mr. Berg for accepting our invitation to come before the members of the League at its annual meeting to share information on voting justice, advances, and other matters. Mr. Berg, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat, for that warm introduction. You guys hear me okay? Great.
Yes, we can.
So, of course, I greatly value the partnership that we've all forged over the past several years, and the feeling is mutual. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I want to thank Catherine Gray, Leslie Siegel, and my friend Kate Doran for their leadership and unwavering dedication to voter education, access, and empowerment in our city and state. And I want to thank all of the City League members, not just for tuning into what is obviously a very different annual meeting format than in years past, but for what you folks do between the annual meetings, right? Election cycle after election cycle to make democracy work for all New Yorkers. And in this case, it's not hyperbole to point out that even the most well-financed organizations on the planet do not sustain themselves for multiple centuries just by virtue of existing or having an inarguably noble cause. So as we know, organizational success requires so much more than that. Indeed, it is all of you and your combined efforts that breathe life into the city each cycle. And together, in partnership with like-minded neighbors, you continue to pump the vitality into New York City's beating activist heart through our society's intergenerational high and low watermarks. And it is you who make and keep this chapter vibrant and dynamic, filling the calendar with timely meetings, mobilization campaigns, and compelling educational or civic programming. So thank you. It is truly an honor and a privilege to address you today and to count myself as a member among your ranks. So let's get into it. If I were asked to speak about the state of voting rights in New York and America today, hypothetically, of course, I think it's right to say that we find ourselves at a pivotal crossroads. Who are we as a people, and what is our legacy? As a nation of immigrants built upon the ash heap of fallen empires, born out of enlightenment and the exploitation of colonialism, demanding that we should be free, asserting our claim to popular sovereignty, to life, liberty, and property while glossing over our founding original sin. What sort of society do we wish to build together, and how to reform our union more perfectly? So on one hand, here in New York and around the country, we've seen some very real progress on voter access. The technology that we're seeing is being leveraged to modernize the way we register to vote, the way our records are maintained as we move, and the way the public information can be shared. People are woke to injustice. Consciousness and outrage about infringements to our civil rights is ascendant. Every downtrodden individual with a camera phone is now a whistleblower in the making. A blinding spotlight is being shown on anti-democratic practices like gerrymandering, voter purges, and too many other forms of suppression. The real barriers to voting faced by the most vulnerable among us that in our recent past seemed invisible are starting to be called out for the unfairness they inflict and perpetuate. Some of them are starting to come down, though, through innovation or increased understanding and activism that refuses to be ignored. Here in New York, we've seen more progress in the last 18 months on reforming the way we register and vote than in our collective living memory. And I guess that's supposed to be the good news, but you folks at the League know that our work is really just beginning to scratch the surface of democracy reform and all that is needed. So when I look out on our elections nationally in New York, I also see a treacherous landscape of fatal voter deadlines, due process pitfalls, and civil rights landmines that can frustrate a basic truth: that every eligible American should be able to register and cast a ballot without difficulty and have that ballot counted by transparent systems and processes. Full stop. The public trust and legitimacy of our institutions demands nothing less. But too often, our government falls short of that commitment. Too often, government breaches that sacrosanct social contract. For me, it begins with our largely 18th century Constitution and its antiquated notions of individual human rights, including how they are enshrined vis-a-vis the government. Factor in the absence of those many unwritten democratic norms that we know we cherish as a civilization, but never quite got around to codifying into law. The good stuff we know about good governance, the role of watchdogs, oversight, and accountability, the need for fair dealing, and the wink and nod of honest graft, ethics in government, justice as fairness under law, the indispensability of a free and independent media, the triumph of objective facts and truth over propaganda, and of course, the sanctity of the fundamental right to vote. So when you overlay the zero-sum nature of our politics, where the buy-in for suffrage is often viewed as transactional, the rise of authoritarianism at home and abroad, and a public health emergency of unknown duration, we've got some work cut out for us this year, folks, and next year too. Elections do have consequences, but making positive change in the space requires bifocal acuity. When it comes to assisting a particular voter who encounters difficulty voting, too often the problem is attributed to some user error, either that of a careless voter or a poorly trained poll worker. Society shrugs at that one-off problem. We assume the system mostly works, but we at the League must know better, because from our experience, we know many of these issues are actually systemic in nature and capable of repetition at scale. In the aggregate, there are thousands of lost votes and victimized voters each cycle. To truly fix them, it will require that we all lean in with help from our better angels and reimagine our election system and our civil society as we wish them to be. A system that respects the individual, that puts voters and their fundamental rights first, and that is our task at hand in 2020 and beyond. So what I've described here is the intense and very real moment that we are in, one that could go either way in the cold calculating corridors of Albany and Washington, one that the city and state league chapters are uniquely poised to engage in on behalf of equality and due process, fairness and voter access, transparency and accountability, which is a good place to pause, a good place to reflect on over 100 years of the league's relentlessly positive civic purpose of self-empowerment through education and advocacy, of public-minded service. This is your proud legacy and my great honor to recognize and learn from. So thank you.
Thank you so very, very much. Thank you both. We will now open up for questions from the audience. Audience, please enter your questions in the Q&A and indicate which speaker you are addressing. And you may do that now, please. May, would you let us know when you have some questions from the audience?
Pat, it's Leslie. We actually have 2 questions from the audience right now. So the first question I think is directed to Doug Kellner. The Board of Elections instructions for the absentee ballot was incomplete. They did not mention signing the box outside of the smaller envelope. Also said that you can use pencil as well as pen.
There are several comments on the instructions. It's a good point that has to be addressed. The instructions are in the statute, so it's not something that the board can use. And you are able to use pencil, although it's preferable that people use pen.
Thank you. The next question actually is exactly the same as the other question. Are there any other questions from the floor? Okay, Pat, do you have some questions that you'd like to read that we got in advance?
I believe that most of the questions that we would have had were answered. I think there's probably just one with regard to Mr. Kellner, please. With the early voting and the, is there a sufficient number of poll workers? Are there drop-off boxes for absentee ballots for those that do not have trust in the post office?
Yeah, that's a good point. The absentee ballots can be delivered to any poll site. Certainly at the early voting poll sites I visited, they were all aware of that procedure and had a place for those ballots. And that's also the case on election day, that doesn't even have to be your own poll site. You can deliver a voted absentee ballot to any poll site or Board of Elections office anywhere.
Thank you.
I do have a question. You got it, Leslie, from the chat?
We have yes, I do, May, thank you. We do have a question in the chat as well, which is again for Mr. Kellner. What amount of lead time and resources does the Board of Elections expect to need to do a good job with the level of turnout expected for the November election? If we end up replicating the mass absentee mailing method used for the June primary, what would that look like?
It's a great concern. You know, everyone has, the governor and the legislative leaders have all said, well, we'll take a look at this after the primary to decide what to do in November. But they can't dilly-dally over this because September 12th is the deadline for sending out military and overseas voters ballots. And we really need to get these decisions made by mid-July in order to do proper planning.
Great, thank you. And we do have one more question from the floor, from Carol Van Duysen. My brother lives in Portland, Oregon, and thinks voting by mail is the way to go. He originally voted in New Jersey. Why are you against it?
Well, I can go into a long list, but Let's start with, we're making the post office our partners in election administration. And there are all sorts of problems that come from that. And then there are, in my view, very substantial security issues. And at this point, we don't have in place a good system for addressing the security threats. And to very quickly summarize it, at every step of the process, there is room for inappropriate conduct and for negligence. And in New York City, my experience is that sometimes negligence is accidentally on purpose when it favors one candidate or another. But the steps are, the absentee ballots actually have to get to the post office. Then the post office has to actually deliver them to the voter. Then the voter himself or herself should be the one who is actually marking the ballot, as opposed to a family member doing it for somebody else, or where outside groups put pressures on the voters to come together and vote collectively. Then the voter has to actually get that ballot delivered back to the Board of Elections, where it has to be received and processed and counted. And those steps between the time it leaves the Board of Elections and the time it comes back to the Board of Elections, there's no effective chain of custody to assure that, that the votes are being done properly. So, as I say, I could elaborate on all of these, and contrary to the widespread view, there have been lots of incidents of problems in these areas that are well documented.
Thank you very much. We are running at time, so I think we're going to stop the questions from the floor. I will just turn it over to Jarrett Berg. Jarrett, do you have any questions? I'm sorry, any comments you would like to make in closing?
I was just going to add to that, we don't have the infrastructure, the front end or back end infrastructure in place for that yet at this point this year. The states that primarily vote by mail have had that in place and built that in over years, in some cases even decades. That goes along with a culture of voting by mail. So there's the policy question. There's also the question of building the plane while flying it, rolling it out in the same year into the heaviest election in the heaviest year of the cycle. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why we need to be very careful what we roll out this year.
Thank you. Back to you, Pat.
Well, thank you very, very much to both speakers. You were wonderful. The information you provided is very helpful. And thank you for all the years of support that you've given to the League. Thank you. I will now, excuse me. I will now turn the meeting back over to Kathy for closing remarks.
To Ruth. To Ruth.
To Ruth for closing remarks?
No, for her beginning remarks.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, Ruth, you're on.
Where am I? Here I am. Okay. Thank you, Kath. Thank you, everyone. We've had a little adjustment to the schedule, so we're a little bit off the planned schedule, which happens with virtual and actual planning. So I am co-president, as I had said before, but I want to thank everybody here for the amazing work that's been done, and particularly to Kathy, our co-president, who has been completing 5 years of dedication to the League. I served as co-president for 3.5 years, and becoming co-president has been a real highlight in my life. Me with my fierce New York attitude and Kathy with her Minnesota Nice. We made a great team. I brought to the job my desire to expand our outreach in every borough, which we did. And Kathy brought her desire to raise our visibility, which she did by attending just about every single event in the city to represent the league. We both helped increase our volunteers and partners, and we worked with an amazing board to develop strategies for our future. One of my fond memories of this past year was working with the Staten Island Yankees to feature voter registration at their games. As a huge baseball fan, but for the Mets, of course, this was a pure joy. I also loved the league getting calls from the New York Philharmonic and from the show Hamilton on Broadway, asking us to join them in celebrating women's history and registering voters. We had just begun working with Hamilton when New York City went on pause. It was phone calls like these that we knew we were making noise in the city. And we like to make noise. I have always enjoyed hearing us shout, "Vote louder." And we hope to keep doing that for many years to come. The league has accomplished a lot during this time as co-presidents. The league was instrumental with the changes in the voting laws of 2019. We led the charge for ranked choice voting in New York City. We started new committees, Voting Reform Initiative, the Census, and Women's Rights. And most recently, the Committee on Criminal Justice Reform, which recently sent out an action alert about police violence with advice on how we can advocate now for changes in our system. We reactivated the newsletter, creating a quarterly document that we can all be proud of. We expanded our training to get more communities and volunteers ready for the next election. We hosted open houses at our office, people's apartments, and pubs to introduce the league to new groups and encourage membership. And we adapted to what the pandemic brought to our city and to our lives. There is more information about the committees and what the committees have accomplished, which will be sent to you in a packet later on, and you'll be able to see all of the accomplishments that we have had and what we will be doing in the future. It has been an honor and a pleasure serving as your co-president. I am retiring from this position, but not from the great and purposeful work that the league has done every day. And now I hand it over to our co-president.
Thank you, Ruth. We are certainly living in interesting times, but it gives me hope to see the league and young activists rising to meet these challenges. And for me, I'm rising each day to learn all the new technology. And congratulations to you all for Zooming today. Who thought, would have thought? When the pandemic hit New York City, it was thanks to our staff, our operation manager, May Takahashi, and administrative assistant Natalie Silverman, who helped us quickly close the office and make the adjustment to the virtual world. They provided us with training and know-how. Now with so many voices of the unheard voices on the street, they are being heard. I got that a little bad. With many voices of the unheard now being heard on the street. The league must strengthen our commitment to diversity. Our voices must be heard, and we must change now. The league has recognized why voting is so important. And today we are being joined by athletes, politicians, celebrities in song and film, other good government groups, and young activists. The motto we used for the first Women's March in January 2017 was "Vote louder," and it needs to ring louder today. There are so many highlights from my past 5 years as your co-president. We stabilized our finances. We increased visibility of the league and created new partners. We merged our 501c3, C4 into one entity. This will strengthen our, will streamline our financial report and save us money. We had a gala to celebrate our 100-year history. We created a beautiful journal of the past and for the future leagues. Along with video and picture galleries to share with all. We have been able to update our technology and knowledge thanks to our board members' gifts and skills. We organized the league's last 20 years of documents to join our archive dating back to the American Suffrage Association at Columbia University. It has been an honor to be your co-president. I would like to thank all of you for coming to this virtual meeting, this being the first annual meeting of the newly formed League of Women Voters of the City of New York, Inc. We would also like to thank Robert McConnell for preparing our beautiful slides, and thank all of you who worked so hard to make this meeting happen. Being the first virtual meeting, I think you all did an awesome job. Before I hand the gavel over to our amazing new slate of officers to close today's meeting, I would like to say on behalf of Ruth and myself, it has been an honor and a pleasure to serve as your co-president. We could have not done it without all of you, our staff, membership, and volunteers. The League attracts thoughtful, insightful, dynamic, energetic members. Each one of you brings your own special talent and skills to the League, and we all share a desire to make democracy work for everyone, remembering the phrase that Fanny loves so much, democracy is not a spectator sport. The League's strength depends on your continual involvement in League activities, and the future depends on your vision and work. And now, we hand over, I'm not on the screen. I'm going to hand over to Leslie and Diane and a yellow rose because I don't have the actual gavel from the office. So the yellow rose is the yellow rose of suffrage. So Leslie and Diane, thank you very much. It's been an honor.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and thank you for the yellow rose. I'm Leslie Siegel.
I'm Diane Burrows. Leslie and I are very honored and proud to be your new co-presidents. We look forward to working with our members and volunteers as we continue to build the League's legacy into the future. But we couldn't do this without the solid foundation given to us by Kathy and Ruth. Thanks to both of you for all you've done for the League during your tenure as co-presidents, and before that as board members and volunteers. Your passion for the League is highly motivating. You've set a high bar. You've both encouraged our participation and that of many others. You gave us leadership opportunities. Our very successful centennial celebration occurred under your leadership, the fruits of which are helping us to survive in this difficult time. Kathy, your sense of history and continuity from the League's past to the present keeps us grounded in the legacy of the League. Your knowledge of the archives is invaluable in getting out our message. We are so pleased that you are going to continue as League archivist. Ruth, the outreach you've done to cultural institutions such as the New York Philharmonic and the Staten Island Yankees has helped expand our visibility and gives us new partners to work with going forward. We are so excited that you have accepted the role of cultural coordinator to ensure that this work continues. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our committee chairs for the work they have done this past year, and especially how they've adjusted to the virtual world necessitated by the pandemic. Thank you to the co-chairs of our Census Committee, Laura Quigg, Eunice Coe, Ashmi Sheth, and Ali Swatek. To the co-chairs of our Committee on Criminal Justice Reform, Judy Berg, Zuhal Jamil, and Akila Tomlinson. To the outgoing chair of our Education Committee, Mary Jenkins, and a welcome to our new chair, Jane Hatterer. Thanks to our program committee chair, Joanna Leifer, to our voter and information services co-chairs, Susie Gomes, Zena Kaufman, Laura Quigg, and Jerry Russo, to the chair of our voting reform initiative, Bella Wang, and to our Women's Rights Committee co-chairs, Elizabeth Dougherty and Dorothy Usadane.
Thanks to Ruth, Kathy, and our committee chairs, we are well positioned to continue the League's legacy, overcome the challenges that we face, and expand on the opportunities we have. Our mission must ensure a commitment to anti-racism so that everyone in New York City, regardless of color, economic standing, gender, gender identity, ethnicity, or sexual orientation, has their voice heard and their dignity upheld. As part of our commitment to anti-racism, I'd like to let you know that the League of Women Voters of the City of New York is celebrating Juneteenth as a partial holiday. Juneteenth is a day of reflection and learning and unlearning our unconscious biases. Governor Cuomo has signed an executive order in order to make tomorrow a holiday for state employees. And we decided last week that the League staff will have the day off. Volunteers will be answering our phones so that we will still have coverage for primary voters with questions. The pandemic and the budget crisis reminds us how vigilant we must be so that voting rights and accessibility are protected, especially for underserved communities who are suffering at this time. We are ready to step up and accept the challenges of this important election year and of Census 2020. Give me 1 minute, please. I'm very sorry. Sorry, I apologize, everybody. Even in the midst of these challenges, we have opportunities. We're committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion and are taking positive steps to expand the diversity of our membership and ensure all voices are equally heard within the League. Using our digital tools will be one enabler to diversify our membership, volunteer base, and partnerships, expanding into more communities across New York City. Even when we are finally able to meet in person again, we can continue to use these tools to make it easier for people across the city to participate in our events. Our newly adopted leadership structure will allow us to focus on building out membership, communications, technology, and the financial security we need to move our mission forward. This is a great time to be involved with the League. Thank you again to Ruth, Kathy, and our committee chairs for all you did to bring us to this point. We have big shoes to fill. I'd also like to give a shout out to our interns, Tyra Vianette Gomez, graphic design and social media intern, and Ariana Ahmed, our operations intern. Thank you for all you've done in this past year, and we really look forward to what you'll do in the upcoming year. Now, before I call for a motion to adjourn the meeting, Suzanne Stasevich, president of the League of Women Voters New York and a proud member of the LWVNYC, has kindly given us a statement to read, welcoming our new slate of officers and board. I will read it out to you now. I would like to congratulate the new officers and members of the Board of Directors of the League of Women Voters of New York City and thank them for taking on these leadership roles. You've taken on the challenges of leading this organization through an election year in the midst of a pandemic and as part of the seismic shifts in our city and our country to address systemic racism. As president of the League of Women Voters of New York State, I look forward to a robust collaboration with League of Women Voters New York City to move forward with our action plans for a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive League of Women Voters organization and to fulfill our mission together to empower voters and defend democracy for everyone. Thanks, Suzanne. We're really looking forward to a robust collaboration with you and state too. So with that, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Please type motion adjourn into the Q&A box. Is there a motion, please, to adjourn the meeting? Thank you, Jessica. Jessica's motion to adjourn. So with that, I hereby adjourn the 2020 annual meeting of members. Thank you all so much for your participation.